Hi, and welcome to Minar. Such a catchy tune. Our monthly online gathering for live theater prop professionals and anyone interested in stage props. I'm Ben Homan, Vice President of SPAM and Properties Director at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, where I worked for 29 years. I also spent a couple years at Actors Theater of Louisville and got my degree from the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. SPAM was formed in 1994 to create a fellowship among prop professionals to address issues of common importance and to create parity with other production areas. We are an association of professional prop educators and managers from not-for-profit producing organizations with an international communication and support network that shares resources, information, solutions, and techniques, as well as safety information, continuing education, and our stock. We promote the highest professional standards among prop artisans and craftspeople in the field of props to potential prop professionals, while working to establish educational standards for the training of prop artisans. We now have over 150 active members, reaching from Hawaii to Ireland and Canada to Florida. As with previous seminars, we're requesting pay-what-you-can donations to help support this programming and our annual grants for early career prop professionals. If you can afford to donate, the link will be in the chat during the session. We truly appreciate any help you can give. We have enabled live transcriptions for this webinar. If you'd like to use them, click on the live transcript button on the bottom and then select Show Subtitles. Alternatively, you can click View Full Transcript to see it in the meeting side panel. I'm joined tonight by Erica Schnockel, Lori Harrison, and Patrick Drone in a conversation about Sweeney Todd in our first Anatomy of a Production webinar. Since we've all recently tackled the prop challenges presented in this bloody, brilliant musical, we'll talk about how we approach them in our different productions. In addition to discussing our production here at Utah Shakespeare Festival, I'll also be your moderator and host for the evening. If you have questions, please post them in the chat, and we'll incorporate them as we go along. Be sure to stay to the end to hear about our upcoming Spaminars and other ways you can interact with and learn from our membership. I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little how they got to where they are. So Erica, get us started.
Hi, my name is Erica Schockmel, and I am the prop manager department of one single person at the University of Utah Department of Theater. I started at Utah State University, where I got an acting directing degree and also a design degree. Went into AEA, acting and stage management for a while, and found that I really, really like props, picked up a bunch of jobs, and then I've been at this job for 7 years, and I'm also the prop designer for Plan B Theater and a couple of other places in Salt Lake City.
Awesome. Lori?
I'm Lori Harrison. I run the prop department at the San Francisco Opera and have for what feels like a million years. Before that, I worked kind of elsewhere in San Francisco, but also at a bunch of other opera companies, Santa Fe Opera and Greater Miami Opera. We've got a pretty big department, and I don't really know what else to say. We're in the middle of a show, so people may wander in and out a little bit.
That's great. Patrick?
Greetings all, I'm Patrick Drone. I've been doing props for around 27 years. I have been with the University of Michigan for the last 17 years. Interesting fact, I've also built nuclear reactors and worked on Model Ts. My shop has a staff of 3, an associate shop manager, and an artisan, plus myself. In any given year, we do 2 operas, a modern dance show, 2 to 3 musicals, 4 to 5 dramas, and we also have student labor, plus we are a teaching shop. So a lot of what we do is projects based for learning.
Awesome. So we're just gonna take a minute or two and just talk about our production of Sweeney Todd, who designed it, scenically, prop-wise, and any sort of unique challenges that you might have faced with your production based on your space or things like that. So I'll start. Linda Buchanan directed our production, which literally closed about a week and a half ago. We had 24 performances in an outdoor venue. I think our biggest challenge is that our balcony, which is permanent to the building, is solid concrete. So when you think about the chair and the slide, there was no way to actually go through that deck. So we had to build a tower next to our permanent balcony that the chair had to be able to spin, and when it turned into a slide, meet up with that platform to allow our actors to be able to slide down. That, and our director had some specific ideas about the pies, which we'll talk about when we get to the pie section of this seminar. So that's me. Erica, how about your production?
This production was for the University of Utah Opera Department. They don't have a shop or a theater space or a production staff of their own. And so myself, Haley Rasmussen, who is our assistant TD, she was the set designer. Robert Burrow, who is the head of the opera department, was the director for it. And we had 2 days to tech this and 2 performances in a rented theater space. So we had to build everything outside, load it in, tech it in 2 days, and then had a performance with cast A and a performance with cast B that we had to teach how to use all the special effects and the chair and the blood things. So it was a marathon. We also found out when we got into the space that it was a steampunk themed production, which had not ever been mentioned in any of the design meetings. So
Awesome. Lori?
Our production was in 2015, and it was kind of a massive show that had started in France at Le Châtelet in Paris, and had then gone to Houston Grand Opera, and then we got it. And our biggest challenge with the show was making it work in rep. It was not a set that had ever had taking it apart every single day in mind. And so we also couldn't really use the trap. I think it came from a place that didn't have a floor, so it had a second level and sort of a secret back room in the second level. And it was extremely rickety, as it kept having to get put together different ways. So making it operate in conjunction with a bunch of other shows was the overall challenge.
Cool. And Patrick?
Our production was in our Power Center, which seats over 1,300 people in the audience. It's kind of like doing theater on an aircraft carrier because it's got a 55-foot wide proscenium arch by 28 feet tall. The director was Vincent Cardinal. Set designer was Vince Mountain. So we had a pair of Vinces. The costume design was Jessica Hahn. We actually teched for 8 days, and then we only had 4 performances because we're more interested in the education of things. Our theme for the show was actually people who were reenacting the story in an abandoned warehouse during that time period. Like it had just happened in the news a year before, and they were retelling the story using found objects from the warehouse.
Huh.
It's kind of a fun conceit. I did find it interesting when all the production photos started coming in that the windows, everybody has windows, like factory style windows in their set designs, which of course isn't called for in the show, but I think a lot of designers find that as an interesting metaphor for the time period and stuff. So I thought it was really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about chairs. I'm going to share my screen because I have pictures of all 4 of our, oh geez. Hold on. Oh, how do I make that go away? There we go. Sorry. Okay, so San Francisco Opera, University of Utah, Utah Shakes. So here's the, oh, stop going forward. Oh, there we go. So Patrick, your chair.
Our chair was one that we, the director and the set designer located it. It wasn't something built in our shop. We actually located it from Hope University here in Michigan. I don't actually know where it originally came from. The fascinating thing about it is the entire thing is built out of rollers from a conveyor belt, so that when it is tripped, it actually folds out flat which I can share the video if you'd like me to, Ben.
Yeah, that'd be
Um,
awesome. It's actually a really cool effect.
So I'll do a quick share. This will stop. Oh,
Do I have to stop?
that's okay. I'll be the bully and just push you out.
Okay.
Boom. So here we've got our Sweeney. And this is one of our first victims. He notifies the crew underneath by stomping his foot.
So slick. Okay, now I have to go back to mine. Okay. And there's University of Utah.
So this chair from University of Utah was designed by George Maxwell, probably 25 years ago, and it's been in the stock at Pioneer Theater Company, which is on the same campus. We kind of overlap and share stock with the University of Utah. So we were lucky enough to have it, and we just spruced it up a little bit. But they had used this same chair in their production of Sweeney Todd that they had done probably a year and a half. We did this in the spring of this year, and I think they did this in 2019, right before the COVID shutdown of everything. So we were able to borrow this and a few other props like their pies pretty easily because they were freshly available. This has a lever on it and does the same kind of tilty thing, but it doesn't have the great roller sound effects. It is really, really heavy. And that was a big problem for us trying to move it up the stairs to our second level because we didn't have a trap as well that we could use.
Awesome. And then Lori.
We had that same weight problem. This is a real chair, and I don't know where in Paris they managed to find it. As far as I know, this chair is still available because we took our whole set of props and sold it to Lisa Schlenker at Skylight in Milwaukee, I think. And I think they may still have them all. And whoever gets it next, we still have a box that has the original seats. The seats had to be traded out in order to make them work with the mechanism. You can see there's a turntable underneath it and there's a trap on it. And it worked throughout the performances. It did not work throughout all of the rehearsals. We had a lot of monkeying around to do to make that a smooth drop on the slide. It was a beautiful chair, but it weighed a ton.
And does the back of it tip back as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and actually the guy who kept doing all the work on it, I walked around today asking everybody I could think of, what do you remember about Sweeney Todd? And the one that had to keep fixing, the chair worked okay. It was the chute that was really a problem. And we kept having to re-rig the chair to make it work better with the chute.
Awesome. Yeah, at our chair, we decided early on that trying to make the back tip as well as the seat was going to be a little more challenging than we felt we could handle. So our seat just tips down to line up with the footrest. So the actors kind of keep their head kind of against the headrest, and they sort of fold their arms over their chest, and the seat would just drop and they would slide out. So we didn't actually do a tipping back. So they didn't get a full sort of 45 degrees sort of slide out. They just went from their butt kind of down and just kind of leaned back as they went. So it was a little bit easier mechanically. The arm here on the side, you pulled that and there was rollers underneath the seat, and the seat would just drop to line up with the footrest. And the footrest was only about a half inch off of the floor. And then scenery made a ramp that dropped down, trapdoor that dropped down. So everything was like perfectly level. very different looks for the chair too, which is really interesting. Ours was fairly lightweight. We actually had 2 crew dressed as performers carry it on. We didn't do the whole crate and the crane sort of thing that's in the script. They sort of carried it on, and we had a pivot that they had to line up and get it set on. But that's kind of how our chair worked. Does anybody have any questions about the chair before we go on?
Yeah, ours, we actually had room in the fly system. So when it entered, it flew in. And it just had this fabulous wow factor for
Yeah.
the audience.
Well, I love that yours is like on a single pivot point.
Mhm.
Like I was like, I saw it, I was like, man, like the physics on that, because we kept having to deal with like, you know, the weight of the actors, and
Yep.
like we thought we had built it really strong. And Karen asked, we built it from scratch. Our designer kept sort of messing with the angles to make sure that because of our concrete balcony and where the trap door had to be in the repping piece of scenery, that everything was going to match up physics wise. But we thought we built it really strong, and about 2 weeks in, the actor literally ripped the handle off of the chair at the judge's death at the end of the show. And luckily the actor playing the judge was really like on it, and he was like, okay, well, I can slide forward and sort of drop myself off the front of the chair and still go down the slide so we can get through this performance, you know. And then we took the chair back to the shop and like beefed up all of the metal, like went to heavier gauge steel and everything, like re-welded the entire structure. And it lasted the rest of the performances. But I thought we built it really strong to begin with, and was like, oh, physics is not playing nice with us. So
Yeah, I was really grateful to the original artist, whoever that might have been, who built our chair.
it's really cool. This is a good question. How did you tackle the problem of stickiness, like keeping the chair slippery enough to slip off of?
I had rollers.
You had rollers. Yeah, yours was easy.
Ours is
ahead.
vinyl, and so I think with the costumes and the vinyl, people slid off pretty easily, and because it also went totally flat, the actor who was playing Sweeney could lift people up a little bit and make it a longer line, so people just tumbled right down.
Sorry, I know it's easier to just easier to talk than to type. My name's Meg. I'm a graduate student at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, and we'll be doing Sweeney Todd in November. And so I'm asking these questions in preparation for our production. With the slipperiness, did you find any cleaning of the vinyl when you were wiping off blood every night? Did that affect the vinyl at all, or did it really not make a difference?
Ours was we covered it with a tablecloth vinyl, so it had that plastic overlay on it, and it took cleaning products just fine. It didn't hurt. Well, our blood cleans up with water, and so it took water just fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we just used vinyl too. The designer really wanted leather, and we were like, the vinyl's going to be way slicker. And when we get to blood, we'll talk about it more. We didn't use any blood in our production, which was interesting. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So we didn't have that issue, but our vinyl was very slick, and they did clean it like once a week just to make sure. But the angle really, I mean, if you're going, you know, more than 40 degrees, the weight of the person is going to want to slide out of it. So yeah. Okay, great. So let's each talk a minute or two about our pies. And if we used real pies, how we dealt with the suet that she has to, you know, she's making a pie on stage at one point. And then what we made our sort of pies out of. And again, I have photos of 3 of our pies. Let me share again. I don't think I have. Oh, so this is San Francisco Opera. This is your, yeah, since Lori talked about, I have this photo, this, and this. So.
And I have a few more that I could show. We got the pies from Chatelet and from Houston Grand, and they were made out of some sort of plaster, which means that they were really loud and they were really heavy, And all of the people that had to carry whole trays full of them literally couldn't carry them. They were that heavy. And so we made a mold using their heavy pies and used a, like a pour foam that I think we treated so that it had a paintable surface. Made a whole lot of lighter weight pies. We had to make both raw pies and cooked pies because they were in various stages of being made. And some people had to actually eat pies. So we had a local bakery match the pies. And one of the things that you showed was our mix that was meant to look like a mix of meat. There was a big meat grinder that they actually, yeah, that was our meat, which was mashed potatoes with varying degrees of food coloring in it, which came out in little threads the way that meat grinding does. And the bakery made pies that looked just like ours using cherry pie filling. So our cleanup was a mix of blood, and the floor was really textured. It was really a pain in the neck every day, cleaning up the blood and the cherry stuff, like little bits of cherries and cherry jam. So those were our pies.
Cool. Patrick.
Ooh.
So for our production on the pies, which I will share in just a second, we had one student that was taking it on as a project, that just the pies themselves. Now, these were heavily influenced by the Tim Burton and Johnny Depp movie. That's actually where this style came from. They were made completely of felt. And then we also used ground up tire mulch inside of it for the meat. And when we were making them, the decision was made that she was only ever making the crust. So that way we didn't have to deal with the filling itself. And the director decided that only the pie before Sweeney starts offing people was to be eaten. So when he comes into the pie shop for the very first time, and that pie actually was a miniature pie from the grocery store turned upside down, and we hit it with a little bit of gray food coloring to make it look gross. So that way, once we were in the bakery and seeing the baked pies, we totally changed the look to something nicer. And this also gave us this nice slit in the top, which is where one day we did a big casting project where every student got to cast their own thumb. And then when they needed to have the thumb pulled out, we literally had a thumb inside of every single pie, and we're able to pull it out for that scene.
Awesome. Erica.
So I don't have a picture of my pies. Our pies look a lot like Ben's actually. But what I do have is a picture of what we ended up making our pies out of that were edible, and it's this. We had gone through a bunch of recipes for pies, and what ended up happening is the number of people who were eating grew from 3 to 30. And at that point, I decided I didn't want to cook for that many people for 2 days, and we went with Grand's honey butter biscuits. And they ended up looking pretty good color-wise on stage, and it was just dividing each one and folding it in half and using a pastry form to match.
Cool. So we, our director, early on, realized we couldn't do like all the edible pies for the Song on Top of Act 2 and stuff. So we had 2 edible pies. Sweeney in Act 1 when he goes in the shop the first time, and then Toby eats one, and he devoured the entire thing. And we actually found calzone type baked frozen product at the grocery store that microwaved for the edible pies. And our director, Brad Carroll, had an idea about the scene at Top of Act 2 where they're eating the pies and singing about it. So we made more of a calzone looking pie, which we know is not the traditional shape, and he was aware of that. They're EVA foam filled with cotton batting, and then painted with multiple layers of paint. And we made about 60 of these for the shelves and everything else. And for the ones that are partially eaten, we made the whole pie, we cut it away, and then took caulk and some brown paint, and basically covered over the cotton batting on the end to seal it in and made it look like the filling. And what we did was when they went up to buy their pies, when the pies were passed out, the actors put their hands over the partially eaten part for the beginning of the song. And then during the song, Sweeney calls down from upstairs to Mrs. Lovett, and they kind of go the other side of the stage and have a moment back and forth. And while that's happening, everybody spun their pies over, flipped them over. And so when we came back to them singing about how good the pies tasted, they all could hold them up and had taken several bites out of them. But because we had 24 performances, we didn't want to have 11 people eating pies every night. It would have gotten really expensive. So we kind of just did a sleight of hand trick to make that happen. Cool. Anything else about pies?
I ended up using salt dough with alum and baby oil and combinations of that with gelatin and food coloring for the suet and for her making the pies on stage. And that there was a lot of throwing of food and satisfying kind of pushing, and those combinations of products helped that squishy, gross sound effect. Our meat, we ended up using a two-part foam. I think it's the Smooth On Pillow Soft product, and that went through our meat grinder really nicely.
We did salt dough as well for our suet, and Toby cranked the meat grinder a whole lot, but we never sent any product through it. So
We had real flour and real Crisco. Somehow she had this big vat and she was just folding it and making this disgusting mess. And that's what she wanted to do. And that's what we gave her to do.
your meat grinder also, I mean, granted it's opera, but I was like, that is giant. How bad was the cleanup with the flour?
It scraped, just a lot of scraping.
Yeah,
Okay.
our countertop was made to be like a cutting board. So actually the cleanup was very minimal. And when she was rolling out the dough, it was actually just a homemade Play-Doh with no color added. That way they could roll it out, fold it up, do whatever they wanted, but it wouldn't have, I mean, we didn't use any of the types of fillings, so it made it much, much easier.
Right.
And we avoided the having the entire cast eat pies because we were 30-some casts. You always end up with multiple allergies and different things, and it's easier just to not eat anything. Although our Sweeney loved it because he was the only one who actually did get to eat something.
Cool. So razors and blood. I'm going to go last because mine's probably the least interesting. So Lori, talk a little about razors and blood.
I'm actually going to mention that one of the first props I ever made in like 1981 in Miami was a Sweeney Todd razor, and I was unbelievably proud of it because it had it was like a piece of 1/8 inch that I drilled all the way through lengthwise at an angle in order to have a little tube that lived in the handle with a squeezy, you know, food coloring jar in there. I was really, really proud of that. In this production, we did not have a bleeding razor. Instead, we had blood rigs that were in different places on people's bodies, so that the initial beggar woman had it, I think, in her hand, and she did something like this and it spurted out. We used bags. Okay, I'm gonna really try to share here. So we used IV bags with little stoppers with hand operated valves. And I can read what our Sweeney Todd blood guy did, a very elaborate take on how he made these. But we used real equipment from a medical supplier and real tubes, and sometimes we had them run down to their hands. But most of the time we put them into the bibs. We made a whole lot of bibs because rehearsals would really screw them up. And if there was a leak, we had problems. We had to have backups hidden on stage. And he'd tie the bib on, and each bib had a pocket, and one of these was in the pocket, and the blood tube went right up to the throat. And the singer would open up the valve and put his hand on it and squish it, and varying degrees of shooting of blood would happen all over the bib and all over the floor and all over everything. When Pirelli gets stuffed in a trunk, there was a whole blood rig in the trunk with a pedal that had to be filled up. We also had blood that was being poured from a bucket into a gutter, which ran blood all the way across the downstage edge of the stage. We had really a lot of blood.
Wow, it sounds like it. Cool. Erica?
We did not have that much blood, but we did have blood. I'm gonna just share a couple of photos. So luckily this lined up with me teaching my props design and construction class. And so my students got to do blood tests on blood day. So here's kind of a setup of some of the different things that we had started to use. And I guess here is the more important part. So what we did is we did a test of all these bloods for how they would dry, if they would be sticky, and if they would wash out of just muzzle them. And then we sent our samples that had the best washability to our costume designer. And she picked what I thought she was going to pick anyway. And so we went with Wicked Blood Powder from FX Warehouse, which I've used in probably 10 or 15 productions. It's a pure pigment, and you mix it with a little bit of water and then gelatin or other kind of like simple syrups, and it comes out of clothing, off of floors, out of hair, off of hands pretty easily with no staining, because the color stays suspended in the syrup as opposed to dissipating. So it's not an ink. We had the Sweeney Todd razors that you can buy online from Amazon, which are from the Johnny Depp movie, for people to actually shave their faces. And we took those apart and safetied all of them. And then we did a simpler blood rig with just aquarium tubing and a bulb on the end that rested in the actor's hand. So when he picked up his razors in his razor box, a piece of vinyl tape held the tube on, and he would just squeeze it and the blood would come across in a pretty easy rig. And then he could disconnect that with just a finger to hold up the razor afterwards. I'm really jealous of your river of blood. Like, it's desperately would like to make a river of blood sometime.
Cool. Patrick?
I'm not jealous of the river of blood. Here I will share. We actually ended up using plastic pipettes. We built all of our razors. And the reason we did this was because of just the sheer size of our house. Normal size razors would not be seen. And so we actually went 50% bigger. The blades, which in this photograph are marked in green, they actually have holes all the way through them. They're 1/8 inch aluminum with a piece of tube that is glued into the back and had small holes drilled in it that lined up. And it had a 40 milliliter pipette that fit right in. And we actually had a rack of these knives on the table next to the chair. So each time Sweeney needed one, he just grabbed a brand new one. His hand automatically covered the pipette and it was never visible. This also gave us the ability to, at the beginning of the show, we made a couple hero knives and polished them up. And the actor, Jamie Colburn, he got so good at flipping that around, you would have thought there was a mirror ball on stage as the shine of it would go back and forth across the audience. But then it also gave us the ability to, with the one mold, we were able to do up the two Pirelli, or the Pirelli knife also. And it got gold trim and copper because all of the Pirelli stuff, we wanted to be very glitzed up. But then for the blood itself, so he has the blood pack, the pipette under his hand. The robes, barber robes, were actually terry cloth so that they would absorb a lot of the blood, and they would slice the throat and then immediately throw it behind them where a crew person would take it off and get it soaking in water for cleanup. But because it was shooting straight at the neck and going just down a little bit, there wasn't a lot of cleanup, and it had a great amount of just pop to it when it was visible.
Cool. So we built all of our razors. We started our fight choreographers. He was worried about metal razor blades. So we started by making them all out of Sentra. And shaving that to an angle and doing them in metallic paint. But the joint where they would flip open was so thin that they kept snapping them in rehearsal. So we said, they're not going to survive the run. So we switched to aluminum, and we basically built 3 separate panels of aluminum, the outsides, and then all of ours pivoted because we'd have to deal with blood at all. So what we did for blood, and this was directed right from the beginning, we're repping 3 shows in this theater. Each show plays twice a week in rotation. So we didn't want to get blood everywhere because the other 2 shows have to deal with it. So the director said right from the beginning, he's like, I don't want to deal with real blood. The space is large enough. It doesn't read. The whole moment is so quick. We got to spin the chair. We got to do all this other stuff. Let's find a different way to do it. So we worked with the costume designer, and they came up with a different red fabric piece. They're all silk that was hidden somewhere on each of the actors that got their throat slit. And so they would grab their neck and pull it out, and there'd be blood. Or it'd be in their sleeve. They'd pull their hand up and there'd be blood. So we used red silk as our blood, and also all of our factory windows. There was 4 upstairs and 4 downstairs that were the full height of the space. The lighting designer had red parkans, and so like the throat slit would happen, and like all the lights would go out, and all the windows would just go bright red, and lights would come back up, and you would see the silk, and then we'd spin the chair and drop the person. And it read really, really well. It was very effective, especially the first one. The audience was just like, and we had no blood issues, and no cleanup. So that worked out really, really well for us. We did it mostly because about 5 or 6 years ago, we did a production of Stephen Dietz's Dracula in a different theater, but it was repping with an a Two Gentlemen of Verona that was completely white, set, costumes, props, like everything. And so we could not use any blood in Dracula because it was going to track onto the white set or costumes of the other show. So, but we did all kinds of liquid blood for that show that was not red. And that's when, so we started about the show, we were like, we just need to go away from actual blood. And it did work really well, but you have to everyone's got to buy into it right from the get-go and work together to really make it function. We have several questions about blood. So how much of the blood conversation is dictated by you, the prop manager, versus the director or the costume designer? And additionally, like what factors play into choosing different methods of doing or not doing blood? Like, why would you put blood in the razor blade versus in the bib, which I think is a really clever solution, Lori, because then the actors are each controlling their own thing. So talk a little bit about, like, in your process, how that process happens at your theater, the discussion of all that.
Well, seeing as we got our show fresh out of Houston, we kind of did what they did and we improved on it. I think that they improved on what they had gotten from France. Since we weren't starting the show off, the other thing that we had to get pigs might fly blood out of England because that's what they had used in France. And it was very expensive, especially in the quantity that we were using. But the other group that we worked with, not just the costume shop, but our blood conversations all involve the wig and makeup department, almost everything that we do, because it touches both costumes and skin. So we work really closely with the makeup people. And so they get to choose what blood. We use whatever they tell us to.
Right. Cool. Erica?
This was a different process than what I normally go through because we were guesting in to another department. So normally we do have the hair and makeup person. I didn't meet the costume designer until she delivered the costumes for this show. So it was kind of fast and furious. We did have I did send her things to make sure they wouldn't stain costumes. But so it was abnormal. Normally we would work very closely with hair and makeup and everything. And also because we only had the 2 performances, I think we chose the fastest and easiest option, which was to train our 2 Sweeneys, as opposed to train other people how to use the blood rig.
Cool. Patrick?
Our director said, I mean, thankfully he's just fabulous to work with, but he sort of said to costumes and to myself, I want a little bit of blood, not for when Pirelli gets killed, but for when the other folks get killed. But it doesn't have to be a river of blood. He's like, I just want enough to pop it. So the way we worked with it was the costumer decided to go with the straight white bib so that no matter what we did, it would pop on it. And then in just discussions, it became more of a prop just because of the engineering of it. And also because we were already going to be making oversized razors to begin with. It just sort of naturally progressed into props building it. We used Gravity and Momentum blood out of Chicago. We bought their liquid, but then we actually thinned it 50% because at full thickness, it was a little grumpy coming out of the pipettes.
Yeah.
So we discovered that thinning it down gave us that beautiful effect. We consult with costumes quite a bit. We don't have a makeup department. I think if it was up to our costume shop, there would have been no blood because they have a similar feeling about red wine. But thankfully, I mean, it was, I think, totally a collaboration. And part of it we also got the razors into rehearsal as soon as possible with just water so that they could get used to it.
Yeah, we did that.
And that
too.
was instrumental in our world.
Yeah, I agree. Anything you could do to get stuff in rehearsal that requires that kind of stuff is really great. So here, hair and makeup is actually responsible for the blood itself. We help with delivery methods. So if we were to do, like when we did Amadeus a couple years ago, we built the razor and stuff like that. So we use mostly Gravity and Momentum now. We switched to them because it does wash out really, really well. But costumes is like the number one. They get to decide and say yes or no based on washability, depending on the fabrics they've chosen and stuff, which is why we also discuss blood like at the first concept meeting. It's like, what are we doing about blood? So costumes knows when they start to go buy fabric or swatch, like that they are doing something that has to be washable or whatever. But we didn't have to deal with blood in this production, so that worked out really well. Megan, I am going to get to your tooth extraction. I am going to get to your tooth extraction question. Let me ask your other blood question first, and then Robert will get to you. So as far as protecting the costumes as much as possible, Patrick, you said you went, they try to get it all on the bibs.
Yep.
Lori, with them squirting on the neck, like, did it get everywhere, or was it mostly contained by your bibs as well?
It got around. I mean, there were so many towels that they even used, and that he'd wipe his hands and throw them on the floor. And from what I remember, blood was everywhere.
But did it wash out pretty well? The blood that
Yes,
you,
yes.
okay.
I must say that we've used Pigs Might Fly since then, and it doesn't wash out nearly as well as Gravity and Momentum.
This is not an ad for Gravity and Momentum, but their blood is pretty amazing. Erica, did you have any issues with costumes at all?
No, we also used the terry cloth bibs, and then we had wet terry cloth towels on stage for Sweeney to pick up and wipe his hands on, and that got it off of things. I don't believe we washed costumes in between anything, because again, we only did one performance for each, one tech, one performance for each cast. So.
Okay, cool. And then Megan also asked, how did everyone deal with the tooth extractor? Their director wants to go into the mouth, and we're worried about safety. Erica?
We had
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Our director also wanted to go into the mouth, and I don't believe there's any safe way to do that. And so we just encouraged him to do it at a different angle, because we had an actual tooth extractor, an antique tooth extractor, and he did want to put that in an actor's mouth. I don't think there's, try acting or staging it. Don't put it in the actor's mouth.
Yeah, Lori.
Yeah, we had a couple of really giant bloody teeth. We, pulled out somehow of somebody's mouth, and we had to, sterilize them every time. But I don't think that the extractor itself went into the mouth. I think he had to sort of poke it out.
Patrick?
Because of just the size of the theater and all, we actually made the teeth, and they ended up actually cutting this from our show. But what we did was, the teeth were made, we used hog ring pliers because they were not stainless steel, and in the tooth itself there was a magnet, and the tooth extractor and the tooth would already be together in our shaving bowls, and the actor would grab it, put a hand as if they were stabilizing the person, act as if they're reaching in, but the actor actually never opened their mouth, and then just pretended to yank it out. And then a quick flick of the wrist and the magnet would let go, and it would hit the copper bowls that we had made for the show and clank around like a bell, which is what they really did want.
Cool. We did something similar. We our fight choreographer gets involved in anything like that. And so we did much like Patrick. The actors never opened their mouth. They basically, the barber sort of covered it. And we had enamel bowls, white enamel bowls. And I think our teeth were plastic, but sort of a similar thing, that they just dropped it. It was like palmed in their hand, and they dropped it into the bowl just to get a sound. So, but if you're worried about safety, that's when you need to go to like a fight choreographer, or make sure there's a safety person on the show, which there should be anyway, because of all the other stuff you're doing, and get them involved in the conversation. Because safety is very important. Okay, and Robert asks, how many crew members worked the whole trap sequence under the platform? We'll start with Erica.
We had 4 people, and 2 standing by. The chair was on a pivot. It would pivot around. The actor playing Sweeney was able to pull the lever, we had to physically open the trap door because again, with budget and time, we didn't make something that could open mechanically. So the crew opened the trap door and they went down a slide. We caught them or encouraged them to run back on stage and play dead or wiped them off really quick. But yeah, it took that many people.
Lori?
We had at least that many. It seemed like a mob under there. We had a curtain that had to close, and so there were prop people dealing with the curtain and prop people. We had a spongy base that we had created, and it was such a complicated rig that guy kept having to fix. It needed like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 people underneath there, and of course there was always a dresser and a makeup person, and we had to grab stuff they were throwing things down there after.
Wow, okay. Patrick?
Wow, I thought we had a lot with only having 3 people under there. But because of the way our platform was, it had a center pivot point, and they would literally pull the leg out from one end and it would tip up to match the chair. The actor would slide down and then they would just put the leg back under it. And there were safety pins to keep the pivot from rocking when the actors were just walking across it. But it was really only, I think, 3 people. We may have had a 4th under there just as backup in case it was needed, because about 30 seconds after the trapdoor would close, Sweeney would always walk all the way around the chair as he spun it back around.
Cool. We had one, basically because our tower was exposed on like the audience could see from the far extreme sides, could see behind it. So we had one person, it was a 2-level tower, and they were on the 2nd level basically to unlock the locks and drop the ramp down. And when the actors slid down, they slid down past the pivoting part and ran into a 20-foot climbing crash pad, was what kind of stopped them. And then the person closed the trap and then helped the actor then get to the ladder and crawl down. And at the next blackout, there was they had to take like 4 steps to like get behind a curtain to go off stage. But we had very little space, and so we just had one person in there dealing with that. And it was also totally crew driven. There was no mechanical advantage or anything like that. Great. I'm gonna ask Karen's question, but if anyone has any other questions, throw them in the chat really quick. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more. Karen asks, in hindsight, would any of you have built anything differently for any of these effects? Erica?
I would have liked to have done something a little more elaborate for the blood rigs. And again, it was that time cost triangle. We just didn't have the resources or the time to do something more elaborate. But it worked, and it worked consistently. It just wasn't very pretty from close up. But in the theater that we rented to do it, you couldn't even see the rig. You could hardly see the razors. So Patrick probably had a good idea with the large razor build.
Cool. Lori?
I don't think so. I think in this case, we really were sort of, it loaded in and that's what we had and we had to work with it. We didn't, I don't think I even have the luxury of 2020 hindsight.
Okay. Patrick?
Actually, this is one of the few shows that I can say no, everything worked well. Now, what the show benefited from was this is our show 10, so it's our last show of the season. And that year, the director and the designer and all, they were meeting with me in December about the concept and with drawings and everything about how they wanted things to work. So we were able to jump in with research and development of different aspects of it. And we were also just able to make sure and have the support that the show needed because of the fact that everything, all the design was on time. which is a luxury a lot of times we don't have. The other thing that we had on that show is the designers and the director. It's one of the few times that I felt like they had full faith in the shop, and we were able to just use our own judgment, and it helped create a much, much better show.
Cool. I would say we would have done more with the chair. We had some changes. The director thought it wasn't tall enough because we have a weird step on our balcony. And so Sweetie was going to be much higher than the person sitting in the chair. And so we had started construction, basically got it to chair shape, took it over there. And they're just like, it's too short. Sweetie's have to be bending over all the time. We're not gonna be able to see him or hear him. So we have to make the chair 6 inches taller. So all the math and all the design work that had gone up to that point went out the window, and we had to redesign and make the chair 6 inches taller in about 2 days to get it rebuilt and then start rehearsing with it. And that was all just felt really rushed. And then our tech process seemed a little rushed with it. And so we ended up having a few minor issues throughout the run with little issues that I think if we'd had more time at the beginning and had figured out the maths and the science parts of it earlier, it would have gone much smoother. But the rest of the show, I think worked really, really well. I actually think not doing the blood, I know it's a bloody show and that's kind of the idea, but the way that we handled it in our rep, our audience responded to it really well. And we kind of showed that we could do a bloody show and make it really dramatic and effective without having to deal with liquid blood, which our costume department was really happy about. So great. Cool. Well, that basically wraps up. So thank you all for joining us this evening. And thank you, Lori and Erica and Patrick, for sharing your productions. You can find Spam on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Links are in the chat, or will be. Speaking of those channels, stay tuned there to hear more about our upcoming webinars. On September 16th, we're going to dive into blood, guts, vomit, and gore with a panel discussion on how we've created effects for the stage. So several prop masters will be on talking about specific blood, guts, vomit, and gore effects that they've done. And in our last webinar of the year on November 13th, we're cooking up a session about consumable food on the stage and I have to eat what. So we've done one about fake food previously, but this is going to be more about if you have to eat things on stage, what are good substitutions and things like that. So that'll be coming on November 13th. If you're interested in joining SPAM and are a working prop manager, director, supervisor, master, or some similar title in a nonprofit theater, opera company, or children's theater, or an educator who teaches prop classes to prepare students for a career in props, please send our membership committee an email for more information. The email address is membership@propmanagers.org. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Spaminar is produced by the Society of Properties Artists and Managers, with special thanks to SPAM members Patrick Drone, Properties Director and Lecturer at the University of Michigan, Freed, owner of Being Freed, a graphic and web design company, Larry Heyman, the Assistant Professor of Property Design and Fabrication at Oklahoma City University School of Theater, me, Properties Director at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, Stacy Horn Harper, who's the Properties Master at Salem State University, Nikki Kulis, Props Master at First Stage, Amy Peter, Props Master at the Theatrical School at DePaul University, and Karen Robbie Vance, Head of Props at the Guthrie Theater. Thanks again for watching, and once again, please keep your suggestions for future Spaminars coming. We want to know what you want to learn about. Prop on, we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.